check it out. You're looking at the films of one J.R. Bookwalter. I've been a fan of this man's work for as long as I can remember. And because of you, I reached out. I was at a level where I could reach out to one of my favorite directors in the horror genre and say, hey, you got a new movie coming out. Why don't you hop on WrestleRoni and we'll show a whole new audience, a whole new world. And he was about it, and you're going to get it right now. This is a special one. That's why I saved it for episode 150. You guys mean the world to me, and this one's for you, man. Check out what he's saying. When you get done with this, check out these amazing films from J.R. Bookwalter. And for real, thank you for 150 amazing episodes. Y'all made it possible. You guys made this possible. This is one of those dream come true moments, and it's because of you. I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. Let's roll to it. WrestleRoni episode 150, baby. Let's rock it.
All struggled through this horrifying pandemic, but like all struggles, there is eventually light in the form of Dissolvinex.
How's that husband of yours?
Oh, Glenn, he's actually pretty sick right now.
Did he get the vaccine?
Yeah, he's a little bullheaded about that.
The only reason I'm even here is to get Janelle off my back.
There is a new vaccine. It's called Alpha 21, and it doesn't have any side effects.
And it's safe?
So they say.
I had some concerns about the vaccine that you gave me.
You're burning me!
Why is this happening?
But a citywide manhunt is underway for resident Glenn Rollins in connection with these attacks.
So you think Glenn is just walking the streets of Ridgeway with a bucket of napalm melting anybody he runs into?
Well, no reason why they should have all the fun.
Spooky Lou, another wonderful WrestleRoni for me and for you. On this show, we talk about living your dreams. Not only is like this a dream come true for me, but I think we have a guest that I can say has lived the horror dream, at least from my perspective. Maybe it was a nightmare and he'll tell me different. Honest to goodness, one of my favorite horror movie directors, writers, producers, actors, the list goes on and on. Woo, you hear my voice shaking? That's what it's like today. J.R. Bookwalter, how are we feeling?
Good, how are you?
I'm excited. This is so cool. Thank you so much, my man.
Hey, my pleasure.
Yes, I'm glad to have you. After 23 years, we're getting a new movie?
Yeah, I don't know. I like to tell people that I got kicked in the nuts so hard working for Full Moon all those years ago that I took 23 years to heal, and now I'm ready to come back out of retirement again.
Oh, if you don't mind going down that.
It's just a joke, though.
Well, we'll go down that road in a little bit. I'm very curious. But yeah, let's talk about now. Like the trailer looks amazing. I'm excited. Looks like you have a lot of the old crew back even.
Yeah, it was a little bit like Old Home Week, sort of getting the band back together. I mean, it started with James L. Edwards and I, who worked on the story, and then he went off and wrote the script, and of course, writing himself a lead part in it, so that part was easy. But he had given me, when he wrote the treatment, he had sort of given me like this dream cast that he wanted. And I'm like, okay, I can see that. So most of those people, like Floyd Ewing Jr., who hadn't acted since Skinned Alive, he was in my first 3 movies. The people that he wanted were pretty much the same people that I would have cast anyways. So it worked out. We were very simpatico, or whatever the word is, in that regards.
I love it. You talk about skinned alive. The first time I saw your work was actually The Sandman. I rented it from a
Oh
video
wow.
store. Yeah.
Okay.
And it was so like I felt like I knew these people because it's like your movies, the characters always seem like they're very reality based. They seem like some folks I would know here in West Virginia, especially the Sandman, that trailer park.
Yeah, I have not shot a movie in a trailer park yet, and I hope to never have to do that again. That was quite an adventure.
No doubt. So that movie was always in my mind. And then once I got the internet in about the year 2000, I kept hearing about this movie, The Dead Next Door, The Dead Next Door. I had to see this movie. I found a German DVD. I still have it to
Oh
this
wow.
day. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So that's how I found you. Love The Dead Next Door. And there was a trailer reel on there for Tempe Video. And I saw all these. It was just right up my alley. So I found this film and this film. And what a body of work, man. Like, how did it all start?
Well, I mean, it started with The Dead Next Door. That was the first one. I mean, I had done Super 8 short films growing up in Akron, Ohio. Discovered my one of my school friends and I discovered my mother's Super 8 movie camera, which she had used to document my sister and I growing up and all that. It was always a big deal to set up the projector and the screen and all that, and and watch our home movies, and so that was always our sort of childhood fun. But when I discovered that camera, and my friend and I both were collecting Star Wars action figures. This is like 1978, so it was right in the height of that Star Wars mania. We realized we can learn how to do stop motion and start animating this stuff. But that led to probably 40 or 50 Super 8 shorts throughout my school years, and then kind of fell ass backwards into The Dead Next Door, to be very honest with you, because I wasn't sure. I had gone to the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, which was a 2-year school. I had quit at the beginning of the second year because my apartment was robbed, and I came back and I was just kind of bumming around my mother's house. And I was like, what am I going to do? And the long story short, that led to me making The Dead Next Door from the ashes of all that experience.
I love it because we talk grassroots on the channel. It's an independent wrestling channel. I feel this is a similar story to what a lot of our guys are going through right now. Whenever we talk about the Super 8, I read this was the most expensive Super 8 film ever made. So was it a situation of, well, I got this Super 8 camera, let's just use this, or why did you decide on it?
Nobody's ever come forward to challenge that claim. I don't think anybody else would be crazy enough to spend that much money on a Super 8 feature. But the funny thing is, when I set out to make the movie, it was originally all I had access to was my father had a neighbor who would shoot weddings and events and things like that, and he had a really cool couple of VHS camcorders and a nice tape to tape editing system. So when I first set out to do it, we were going to literally shoot it on VHS video for like 10 grand or 8 or 10 grand, something like that. That was the initial thing. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. And then we briefly considered shooting it on a 3/4 inch video, which back in the day was sort of a more professional format. And that kind of led us back to doing it on Super 8. I mean, I did not shoot it with the same Super 8 camera that I had grown up with. We shot on, some equipment that was a little bit higher end, but it was still very much like consumer stuff that you could buy at a store back then.
I dig it because believe me, I had the dual tape deck and editing with it with my wrestling and everything back then.
Sure.
Clear back then. You're a bit before my time. But when you're doing this, do you think, whenever you start the project, is the goal to hopefully get it in a video store? Do you think it might be screened locally? Because I'm sure you can't see it becoming as big as it became.
Well, I mean, Dead Next Door was wound up being a almost 5-year odyssey, honestly. I mean, the making of it was 4 years, and then even from the time it was finished, took another year before it ever came out on VHS.
Wow.
And that was just because of the guy who was financing it was busy, and the money was stalled along the way, and the whole thing, like I said, literally had snowballed from just this tiny little thing into this sort of monolithic, not nightmare, but nightmare is the wrong word, but just sort of became mushroomed into something much bigger than it had intended to. So by the time it came out, I had actually made Robot Ninja, my second movie, which was shot and finished on 16mm film, and that actually came out probably 6 months before The Dead Next Door did. So even though people remember The Dead Next Door, Robot Ninja was actually my first released movie, or escaped movie, as I like to call it.
How about that? And I
And
love
Skinned Alive followed a couple of months later. So actually, both of those movies were in video stores before The Dead Next Door ever was. It's kind of ironic.
So you hit the ground running. You just cranking them out. I mean, if it takes 5 years to make one, I'm sure you got it in your blood and you're doing it. How does Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell get involved? How'd you hook up with those guys?
Well, I mean, there would be no Dead Next Door if it wasn't for Sam, because he was the one. I had gone to him when I was being a bum at my mother's house. I was flipping through old Fangoria magazines and realized, oh yeah, those guys made Evil Dead in Detroit. I was a big fan of that movie. Had seen it many times at the drive-in and in various theaters around Akron. So I just happened to look up Renaissance Pictures and Directory Assistants and called them up, left them a message on their answer machine. A few days later, the phone rings and I answered it, and he's like, "Can I speak to J.R. Bookwalter?" And I'm like, "That's me." And he's like, "This is Sam Raimi calling from Renaissance Pictures." And after I fell on the floor and collected myself, he basically invited me up there. You know, I told him what I said. Look, I'm just looking to maybe get some production assistant work. You know, anything I can do to sort of lend a hand. And he's like, "Well, come on up and let's talk." So I took a selection of my Super 8 short films up there to meet him, and we started. It was just Sam and I, and we started projecting them, and he stopped me after a minute or so, and he's like, "Wind it back, I got to show the guys." So then he goes out and he gets Bruce Campbell and Rob Tappert, and next door was an office with Josh Becker and Scott Spiegel, who were some of their colleagues at the time making their own movies. So all of them piled in there, and then they all watched the stuff. And I guess in the short of it was, I realized that, you know, Sam had made his own Super 8 short films growing up, and he had always wanted to make a Super 8 feature. So it was really his idea to shoot this thing on Super 8, thinking, oh, well, we've both shot a lot of stuff on Super 8. Why don't, you know, and I think something in my crazy shorts sort of reminded him of the crazy stuff that he did, even though most of their stuff was comedy for the most part, when, you know, that they did, at least up until they raised money for Evil Dead. But that was, I mean, that's it. I mean, he asked me, we sat and talked a little bit after that, and he was like, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I was thinking about taking the sort of the Romero approach and maybe doing industrial films and things like that around my hometown. And he said, well, you should be doing a feature, and if you get something going, let me know and I'll kick in some money. So, you know, somebody like that tells you that. I spent the whole 4-hour drive on the way back basically coming up with what became The Dead Next Door, sent him a little, you know, couple of page investment proposal, and to my surprise, he you know, put his money where his mouth was, and that's how the thing got started in the first place. Bruce came in a bit later. I mean, I had met him that first trip, but when we were having trouble doing the post sound work, I had come out to California for something completely different and called Sam and said, "Hey, I'm here. All the picture work was done at this point." He's like, "Well, if you're going to be out here, let's finish the sound." So he went to Bruce, who was sort of between acting gigs, and Bruce had always done a lot of the sound work on their movies. Mm-hmm. So he hired him and basically said, you know, work with this kid and finish this thing. We got to get this done. So I spent, you know, the better part of, I don't know, a month and a half, I think, out in Hollywood, California with Bruce Campbell, you know, working side by side, finishing the sound at the same time that I was finishing scoring the movie, because the music had not been scored yet. So I had to have all my equipment shipped out and set up shop in the valley in Van Nuys at a house that I was staying at, and that's the long and the short of it. So yeah, that was it was quite an adventure.
It sounds like it. I mean, that's when the ball's rolling. What were you thinking? I mean, the 80s is my favorite time in horror movies. Everybody was about their horror movies. Fangos blowing up, the VHS stores. Here you are working with Bruce Campbell. What are you thinking? What was Bruce like to work with when you're doing the voiceovers? Just what was going through your head?
You know, of course, I knew him as the guy from Evil Dead, and you kind of get past that very quickly, because he's very much, you know, if anybody that's met him in a convention or whatever, I mean, that's just Bruce. That's his persona is who he is. It's not, you know, he's not any more deep or complicated than what you see his characters that he plays a lot of times. So, I mean, we hit it off very well. And I mean, we would get into occasional arguments about, you know, he was the one creating the sound effects and I was the one creating the music. So when it came to mixing the levels and stuff, it would be a constant battle. It's like, bring the music up. He's like, no, 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 sound effects got to be louder here. And I'm like, no, no, music. So a lot of that, there was a lot of little tiffs there. But I mean, honestly, for the most part, it was a dream come true because he kind of knew all the stuff that I didn't know, filled in all the blanks that I didn't know about sound. I mean, I had been, adept at some of that stuff, but he taught me a lot of stuff that I did not know about Foley and, dialogue replacement and all that kind of stuff. So it was, no, it was, I mean, it was a great experience, and I credit both of them for, for that movie for sure.
And it makes me think of other stories we hear in wrestling about, you're learning from Bruce Campbell. That's amazing. That's invaluable experience. That's amazing to me. That's so
Yeah,
cool.
absolutely. Yeah. And of course he pitched in a couple of voices and he brought in some other people. Scott Spiegel dubbed his own voice in the movie because he played a character, one of the Zombie Squad guys, and then he pitched in a couple other voices, and they brought in guys like Danny Hicks from Evil Dead 2. They had this whole group of struggling actors that they had worked with that they, brought in for a day or two here and there to do zombie noises or, background extras. We wound up replacing the entire soundtrack. I mean, we recorded sound on location, but it was going to be a very costly and time-consuming endeavor to use any of it. And it was just deemed better to just spend the money to redub it. So that's why it took so long, and that's why it was so involved.
Right. Wow. That's amazing. And here we are in the present. Let's sell the current movie because I definitely want to, before we get too deep, because there's so much I want to ask you, but I want the folks to know about this one because I think it's perfect timing for it. What can you tell the folks as far as, plot, what to expect from it? Because it looks amazing to me.
Oh, thank you. No, it's called Side Effects May Vary. It's about a fictional pandemic that's sort of loosely based on what all of us just went through. It really is a big chunk of fun social satire about, how crazy the world was and how we all as a society sort of react to this thing. It's very critical of sort of the government and how they are quick to, to do things like, put together so much governments and science to the most part, it's just that they're very quick to put together things like vaccines that they rush out to the public without really testing them. We poke a lot of fun at that kind of stuff. And it's really, I mean, politically, it's not leaning in one camp or another. It's kind of like an even, we make fun of both sides and we approach it in a way where, anybody can watch it and go, oh yeah, that's, we get that. That's funny, so there's a lot of intentional humor in it. There's, of course, a lot of blood and guts and all the stuff that we're known for, but it's at its heart, it's just a big, dumb sci-fi horror, piece of fun. That's it. It's a goopy piece of fun.
I love it. I'm so excited. Was it hard to walk that line to try to make sure you was balancing things out? It didn't look like you was leaning one way or the other with the vaccine.
No, I mean, I don't think so. I know the world is a lot touchier place than maybe 40 years ago.
Right
when I
on,
made it
yep.
next door. I mean, back then I was poking fun of a lot of things that I thought, like first time I had gone to Washington, D.C. To scout locations for the Dead Next Door, I was taken aback by how many people were there protesting, like anything you could possibly imagine. They were there protesting all over the city. Like
Really?
and I guess it's like every single day that, in DC, there's always people are angry and they try to take it to the government, to make their voices heard, which, that's the great thing about a democracy, that we can do that. So it was that kind of stuff though, because that kind of was turned into, in the Dead Next Door, I turned it into the, people protesting for zombie rights, that they were against the government experimenting on the zombies and all that. And so if you like that kind of social satire, which is very much in the sort of George Romero vein, from his movies, I mean, that's pretty much what you can expect with Side Effects May Vary too. It's not heavy-handed. It's just, the movie is just kind of a thrill ride, and this is just kind of a background thing. So I didn't feel like we really had any line to cross, or tightrope act to follow. It's just, if anybody's offended by it, I don't know how they could be, because the movie's about a guy who starts melting. So it's an extreme example of science for sure. It's not loosely based on anything really in that regard.
There you go. It's science based. I dig it.
Yeah, I mean exactly. I mean, because that was the thing. I was a huge fan in this 1977. There were two movies that really affected me. The first was Star Wars, and the second was The Incredible Melting Man. So this,
Yes.
when we did this, we were James and I were going to pull an old script out and kind of dust it off and do it, and I just felt like it was a little too big. So I said, well, you know what I'd like to do? I said I've always wanted to riff on The Incredible Melting Man and make something kind of in that vein. But of course, but that's just the first step in it. We piled on so much more than was in that movie, and there's certainly nods to that movie, but throughout it. But it's its own unique animal at this point. But that was the intention. Was just to do that. We couldn't send a guy to space. I didn't figure we could pull that off effectively, so we had to figure out another way to do it. So
Yeah,
the pandemic became the background of how to do it. I mean, that was the thing. It's literally just a story vehicle to get so the guy gets the shot and then he has this ridiculous reaction to it.
there you go. I love it. And you mentioned unique. That's why I've always enjoyed your films. They're always outside of the box, in my opinion. They always are unique and different. That's why I watch them, because they're not like other films. Is that something you're intentionally going for? Let's do something different, or is it just kind of all fall into place?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've tried not to make the same movie twice. I guess that's the thing. A
Yep.
lot of filmmakers, they tend to fall into something and then they just kind of do that same shtick over and over again. And I've not really done that. I've outside of two movies that I made for Full Moon, Witch House 2 and 3, which were not sequels to anything that I originally made. I've never even done a sequel, mostly because of it's not that I don't like sequels. I do. It's just there's always some other story that's more interesting that you want to tell. And I just kind of am a big believer that, a lot of times people make sequels, even if the first one wasn't what you would call financially successful. So to me, I'm just like I'm more interested in just telling different stories a different way and trying taking a different approach each time. I mean, the closest probably thing that I've ever made to Side Effects would be Ozone, just in terms of this is sort of a spiritual successor to it, just because of the way it was shot. Because I not only directed it, I shot and lit it, and did all the editing and all the post sound work and all that stuff, very similar to what I had done in the early '90s with that movie. So I think if to people that love Ozone, they will take to this one. I think it's a better movie personally, but it's just because of the passing of time, and I feel like I've had that growth to do it. So
Hey, and not to undercut Ozone. That's crazy. I was just watching Ozone last night. It's so good. Like,
thank you.
oh, fun stuff. You're cranking them out in the 80s. Somehow you get involved with Full Moon. What can you like, how does that all evolve?
Well, that led. I went from pretty much from well, while I was finishing Dead Next Door, I met another filmmaker named David Dakota, who was at the time starting his own video label, Cinema Home Video, and he was looking for uh, people to make movies for him. So I put my hat in the ring, and we hit it off, and I made a bunch of stuff. Robot Ninja, Skinned Alive. I produced a film called Ghoul School for him, and then I wound up doing in the early '90s, six shot on video movies, Kingdom of the Vampire, Zombie Cop, etc.,
Hmm.
which became notoriously dubbed as the SOV six pack. That was the thing, and we shot six movies over 7 months. And how I didn't kill myself during that time, I have no idea.
Wow.
But it was that kind of snowball back into me doing stuff for myself again. I made The Sandman and Polymorph and produced Bloodletting. And at that point, I kind of felt the itch to like do something a little bit bigger. Had been making them for $8,000 to $10,000, on the cheap, just, and releasing them ourselves. So I kind of packed my bags, headed for LA, and had maintained a, friendship with Dave Dakota all that time. And he actually was at a point where he was starting to go back making movies for Charlie Band at Full Moon, and he was going to do a movie called Shrieker, a creature feature, and he's the one that asked me, would I be interested in doing all the editing and post sound like I had been doing for all the other stuff that I had done, and I said, yeah, absolutely, let's do it. So I was kind of his secret weapon in I was in North Hollywood at the time, and Full Moon was based in Hollywood, and so they didn't really know who I was or what I was doing. They kind of greenlit it. And so I did that basically in secret, essentially, until it came time to go and meet Charlie Band and his father, Albert Band, and lock the picture cut, before we did the sound. And they were so thrilled with it they just kept throwing more and more work at me. I wound up then cutting Curse of the Puppet Master, and then eventually just took over their entire post-production division. I supervised, a group of like 20 people, and they were cranking movies out at the time. They had a deal with a company called Kushner Lock, and that was what was financing that. So they had all these full moon movies, they had surrender cinema movies, they had kids movies going on. There was just all this activity. So essentially I was in charge of just, after the things were shot, they would come to me and I would have to divvy out the work to all the guys that I knew. And that's what kind of led me back to, Charlie kept dangling this carrot of like, well, we'll give you something to direct, which originally was supposed to be that they had a series called Film Monsters, which they only got 3 episodes in, but sort of reinventing the classic Universal monsters. And I'd always wanted to make a Mummy movie. So he promised me the Mummy Reborn. And then when that series got killed, then the conversation went to something called Horror Vision, which was a thing that he had some artwork and a title and stuff floating around. And that didn't happen right away. It did eventually happen, but a movie called Witch House, which Dave Dakota had directed, had done very well in the wake of the success of Blair Witch Project. So he approached me and said, hey, would you have any interest in flying to Romania and making Witch House 2 for us? And I said, sure, that sounds like a challenge. So, I mean, that's how it kind of led back. But I wound up working for them for 5 years in total, produced a bunch of movies for them, directed 3 or 4, I think, things. And it was a very busy time, I have to tell you.
Oh yeah, they were, like you said, they were cranking them out back then. Like, you were in the thick of it, like in the indie horror craze in the 80s, and then Full Moon's blowing up. What was it like being a part of that company when they're on such a rise?
Well, it was a weird thing because they had just lost their Paramount deal prior to me getting involved. So, they didn't have that lucrative Paramount deal, but that doesn't stop Charlie Band. He was still bringing money in and knocking stuff out. But, so it was a transitionary period, I guess is the way I would call it, because they had all this activity going on. But by the time we started, we started doing some of the earliest shot on video stuff for them. We would shoot a lot of stuff on DV cam and finish it the same way, because it was kind of at that point, financially, it didn't make any sense for them to continue shooting on film, when everything was going direct to video anyways. There were a few exceptions of things that were finished on film, but most of them weren't. But it was just busy. I mean, that's the thing. It's like thankfully at the time I was a single guy. I didn't really have any life to speak of, so all of my life was basically committed to doing their stuff. I was doing a lot of stuff on the side myself too. I was starting my Tempe DVD label at the time. I always got a side hustle going on, or try to, because you kind of have to when you don't know where your next dollar's coming from.
Right.
But it was a very, very lucrative time. And the one thing I will say in favor of Charlie Band is he was not, I don't think his head was 100% in the business at the time that I started making the movies for him, and he trusted us to do the right thing too. But he had been going through a divorce from his wife, and his father passed away during that period of time. So there was a lot of stuff on his mind. So he kind of trusted us to just go off, and that's how we kind of snuck these weirdo movies in, like Dead and Rotting and Hell Asylum, and things that you probably would have never seen him make before. I mean, they were his titles, but actually Dead and Rotting was not his title, but Hell Asylum was his title. But we just kind of snuck in all this a little bit more subversive stuff than probably what he was making at the time, or the Full Moon fans were prepared for, I suppose.
That's so funny, because I do the same sort of thing here. I'll sneak in little things that I shouldn't. So is there a fear of being caught, or wondering what the reaction will be? How literal do you mean that when you say that?
No, I mean, we were always, I mean, the goal was always, of course, to do the best job that we could with whatever. He would throw out a title usually, and then we would come up with a, 1-page treatment or whatever, and then he would approve it based on that. And a lot of times he wasn't even reading the scripts at that point, so we were kind of going off making the stuff, and then he'd sit in on the final cut, make some notes, and then that was it, so obviously we're not going out, it's not like we were going off making something that was just so insane that he would never distribute it. But I'm not sure at the time everything was geared around Blockbuster and Hollywood Video. I'm not sure that they were necessarily prepared for what we were dishing out at that point.
It was a wild time, man. It really was.
Absolutely.
I do have to bring up, I know you're a producer on this one, but I have to ask you any information I can get about Bloodletting. That is mine and my wife's film. We watch it every Valentine's Day. We have a
Nice.
DVD copy. That's our romance movie, man. We love it. Look at
No, that's great. Well, you got it. First of all, you have to upgrade to the Blu-ray because the Blu-ray is a spectacular presentation.
Okay.
The picture is such a huge upgrade. You won't even believe that you're looking at the same movie. Went back. I went back to the original Camera Masters and rebuilt the whole show, and so it's a huge improvement. So if you still have the DVD, anybody watching that still has a DVD, you got to get the Blu-ray. It's an enormous upgrade. But anyways, that came about because Matthew Jason Walsh, who wrote and directed it, Ariana Albright, who starred in it, and James L. Edwards, who starred in it, had done a short film version of it called "I've Killed Before," which is on the DVD that we released. And they, it was only 25 minutes maybe or something like that. It wasn't the full story, and Matt always felt like it had not been done properly. So he approached me after we had made Polymorph and pitched me the idea and basically said it's sort of a parody of relationships. It's like it's a like the worst case example of people falling in love and being, and I like that approach. I was like, that's really cool because who hasn't had their heart broken or had been in a relationship that went sour, or you suddenly see differently of somebody. So I basically said, yeah, let's do it. And, everybody was on board, so they got the gang back together and went out and shot it. And I mean, my responsibility was primarily just sort of overseeing it, getting the money for it. And then when they brought the footage, then I pretty much took it over at that point and did all the editing and sound, like I had been doing before. But, so I definitely had my fingers in it. But yeah, I mean, that was, it was a little bit of a challenge because I'm not sure Matt was 100% ready to direct a feature at that time, and you had a lot of personalities because you had Ariana had a very big personality, James had a very big personality, and then you had a Dave Wagner who owned the camera that we were using to shoot it, so he wound up being the cinematographer, and they kind of all at various points would gang up on Matt against some things he wanted to do. And so it was there was a lot of power struggle on that set. So I don't think it was the most pleasant experience for all of them to make, but they were very happy when it was all said and done, and I thought the film turned out very well. So
yeah, the end product speaks for itself. I love that. Great film. Like I say, all the films are super unique. For some reason, you walked away. Can you tell me, now from the outside looking in, you tell me about all this editing and everything. It sounds like you're working your ass off.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I think a lot of people don't realize, and especially once we got into the full moon era, it's funny because I always see like actors on movies and people who are just working on the crew, they all, when you're done, they want to have a wrap party and they want to celebrate, and then they go off and they do other stuff. And I'm the guy that's left holding the bag because I have to take all this footage and turn it into something.
Yep.
It's one thing to shoot it. It's a whole other thing to actually finish it. And very few filmmakers that I know that are actually put themselves in that position, because usually they'll hire an editor, they'll drop it in somebody else's lap and they'll check in or work with them or whatever. But very few filmmakers are this hands-on, in terms of doing all the editing work and doing the majority of the post sound work and all that kind of stuff. So by the very nature of that, I always felt like there was a finite amount of times that I could go through that process before I would probably burn myself out. And I think we reached that point towards the end of my full moon tenure. One of the last movies I made for them was this thing it was originally called Stingers, and it was called Deadly Stingers. And by the time it finally came out a few years ago on streaming, it was called Mega Scorpions, which is not a title I'm fond of, but that was another one of these troubled productions because we were shooting mostly nights, like up in the canyons up at, above Los Angeles. It was cold, it was windy, it was just not a great experience. We had a giant scorpion puppet because the movie's about giant scorpions, and it didn't really do very much. We could throw it at the camera or we could throw it on people, but wasn't articulated, couldn't really do any, even be puppeteered properly. So it was very frustrating trying to find ways, creative ways to make the thing look like it's doing something, which eventually almost all of that puppet was replaced with CGI,
right?
Which was much better decision anyways, because then you could actually have, because there's scenes where like the scorpions are knocking over a car, they turn it on its side and all that stuff, and that stuff looks really cool when you actually have the CG creature in there doing it versus the puppet. But that was the one where I just sort of, that was what, 2002, I guess. That was the one where I just sort of said, you know what, I think maybe this has run its course. I need to take a step back here and assess my life choices, because when I started on Dead Next Door, I had, of course, who doesn't, when you start, off, you have greater ambitions in mind that you're going to maybe get a chance to make something bigger or whatever. You work your way through the food chain. And I was always the kind of guy that it was hard for me to say no. So if somebody offers me something, even if that isn't a lot of money or whatever, I generally would take it, because it's better. I was always like, it's a very blue collar approach. I was like, it's better to be working on something than sitting around not making anything. Well,
nice.
The result of that was that I made a bunch of stuff that I wasn't particularly proud of or happy with.
Right.
So, anytime you're working for hire, it's a very dicey proposal of whether the people who are giving you the money and you have the same sensibilities and are going to want to, land on the same page, so to speak. So that's what it was. I didn't turn my back on the film business at all, because I was still cutting. I cut probably hundreds of trailers for other companies. I did some editing for some other movies. I was working in post sound. I mean, I was never not doing something, whether it was my own distribution with Tempe or, reissuing my movies on DVD or whatever. So it wasn't like I sat idle for 23 years. It was more just that I didn't want to really get behind the camera and do the directing part of it again.
Yeah, I didn't want to do the whole. I get it. I definitely do. But you still, like you said, you're still cutting trailers. You're still editing. You don't stop. It's how many movies?
I've slowed down. I don't do as much of that stuff as I used to, just for the main reason that the economics of the film business are such that most people don't have any money to spend. So everybody, like, if the few people that do come to me, they're like, well, I don't have any money. Can you cut me a trailer? And I'm like, no. Sorry.
Well.
I'll be honest with you, I can't, because I was getting paid good money to do that stuff back in the day. And of course I cut trailers for my own company. I cut, trailers for my own movie. I cut the Side Effects May Vary trailer. I mean, that's the exception, but even my close friends who are making movies, like James Edwards is now an accomplished director and he's made 3 movies, and I have helped with some of his post-production stuff, but he's come to me and asked about cutting a trailer or this or that. I'm like, yeah, no, I can't. Sorry. I'll get involved in some other way. I'll help you all every way I can. But, that I'm trying to save myself for what I don't know. But
no, you can rest a little. I mean, you're still not resting, but
Well, I mean, it's more just, I've learned to say no to situations that especially if I feel like I'm going to get sucked into something that's going to drag out for a long period of time, then I'm a little more wary. I'm a little older and hopefully wiser to those kind of situations.
Well, what happens when Side Effects May Vary blows up and it's getting a warm reception and people start asking for more?
Well, that's the big question, I guess, because I spent all this time telling people that I was never going to make another movie, and now I've made another movie. So now, I mean, it's funny. We did the first 6. We had 6 consecutive nights of screenings last week all over the East Coast, because This is just going to theaters at the moment. So we're doing screenings all over the place. But and a couple of people in the audience asked me, well, what's next? And I'm like, well, I'm not done with this one yet, because I'm still carting it around to theaters, on my own, and then eventually it's going to come out on disc, and so it's hard for me to focus on. Of course, I have ideas, and James and I are actually working on a treatment for what I would like to do. I don't know if it'll be the next project, but a future project. And I have a lot of stuff laying around that never got a chance to be made, stuff that would require a little bit more money, or computer effects that didn't exist at the time, or that kind of stuff. But so I definitely have more stuff in the hopper. As to whether or not I make it, that's going to largely depend on how this one does, because although it's not about money, I don't expect to get rich off of it, certainly, but I have to at least get my money back and have enough to then maybe cycle that into something else.
For sure.
That's kind of the idea. So we'll see. The verdict is still out, but the early reviews have been great, and people are digging it, and we're we're consistently booking more theaters to show it in. So hopefully over time, that was kind of the theatrical thing was just totally a fluke because I had never really done that before, and that was kind of like, well, I don't really know how to sell movies, new movies nowadays because 23 years ago we had Blockbuster in Hollywood and Tower Records and all these venues that sold DVDs, and they're all gone, and you can't even get DVDs at Best Buy anymore. They've stopped selling them. So it's kind of like, yes, I could sell so many copies of a movie direct to consumers, but how do people see movies? Well, most people nowadays see movies on services like Tubi, which are
Right.
free and ad supported. And I kind of just that I know a lot of people do it. All my stuff is on there too, and it's a great service. If you have no other way to watch stuff, it's a great way to discover stuff. But it's not the way I wanted people to discover my first movie in more than 2 decades. So I kind of intentionally have not only skipped the streaming thing, but I'm pushing it all the way to the back end. It's like it'll be on disc way before it's ever streaming, rather than go that streaming premiere route. I'm trying to intentionally withhold it from streaming so that people aren't watching it on their phones or their iPads or
I did.
broken with commercials and all that. It's not a great presentation. I grew up going to the theater, and that's how that's my memory of all those great experiences, seeing stuff at a theater or at a drive-in. And that's the experience I would like people to have the first time when they see this movie too.
Good on you. I respect the hell out of that. I like that a lot because
Well, it may send me to bankruptcy court. I don't know if it's if it's just the verdict is out on whether it's a smart move or not, but we're going for it.
even if so, man, you did it your way. I love that approach to it.
Well, that's what it's all about. Yeah, I mean, I didn't sit on the sidelines all these years to just kind of half-ass it into existence. I guess that's the thing.
For sure, for sure. Now you come back with MakeFlix. I'm like, what's he doing here? What can you tell me about the company MakeFlix and the DVDs and everything?
Well, that came about a few years back. I decided to sort of bury Tempe as at least in terms of it was it became sort of limiting because people knew what to expect from that as a brand. It was sort of like, okay, those are those kind of movies, and if you didn't like those kind of movies, most people just ignored them.
Okay.
So I kind of buried Tempe temporarily. I mean, it was always sort of the parent company of everything anyways, but MakeFlix was years ago when I still lived in LA. I had bought the domain name thinking, oh, that's a great name for a magazine. I was going to do a like kind of an old Cinemagic kind of magazine, about filmmaking.
Okay.
And so that was my first intention. And so I had been paying for the domain name all these years. Like, well, I have this name. Maybe I should do something with it. So that basically became an online store. And the intention was to sell my own stuff, of course, but also sell the work of a lot of other filmmakers. Along the way, I've picked up guys like Fred Olin Ray's Retro Media and Dave Sterling Entertainment. And a lot of independent guys. James Edwards, his movies are available there. And the thing is, everybody's kind of looking for the same thing. They're looking for a venue to sell their movies, and there's a lot of online places you could go to. Great places like Diabolic DVD and buy stuff, but they don't carry everything, and they tend to focus more on the bigger titles from the Arrows and the Shout Factories and all those kind of places. And so MakeFlix was kind of designed as sort of the go-to place for the really like indie kind of stuff. That was the idea. It was, and I kind of initially set it up, wanting to be sort of the hub of a wheel, and the filmmakers would be all the spokes. That's sort of the big dramatic way I had envisioned it. It's like everybody can come and sell their stuff here and have a home. And we've barely scratched the surface really of what I would like to do with MakeFlix, but it has grown over time. I hate to say it, but the pandemic was actually a very big accelerator for the business, because at the time I was preparing a lot of releases. I think I had Ozone and Reflections on the Living Dead and all these restored discs that were in the works, with the intention of going to conventions, because we had always sold stuff at conventions very well over the years. Mm-hmm. And then the pandemic hit, everybody was in quarantine, all the conventions were canceled, but people were still hungry to see the stuff, so people started buying in droves through mail order, and that kind of gave us a nice pun intended, shot in the arm to, for the business to continue. So as much as there was negatives, you always heard the negative side of the pandemic. The pandemic actually wound up being very good for the make flicks business, at least. So, and for a lot of these independents that are looking to get their stuff seen.
I gotcha. Okay. Well, you mentioned you got a lot of old projects laying around that, you just couldn't make back in the day. You didn't have the effects. Is there any of those you could mention that, could, in a what if universe, could be made?
Well, probably the biggest of them is this crazy sort of demon unleashed, end of the world kind of thing called Seven Body Parts, 6 Feet Under, and I've hinted around at it over the years. That something I'd like to get made, and that one goes back to, I mean, honestly, that probably goes back to the late 80s, I'm thinking. I mean, I think I came up with that maybe after right after Dead Next Door.
Really?
Yeah, so that one's been hanging around for a while. Like I said, it's the full script. I've done several drafts of it and even have some conceptual artwork for it and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of a big crazy adventure that would require, I held off intentionally. I mean, people have read the script over the years and there's been interest in it, but it would require a little bit of money. It's not something I could go out and shoot, over a couple of weeks on my own and spend like beer money on. It's got to have a little more resources behind it. The one everybody asked about, of course, is Dead Next Door sequel, which there is a script that was written in LA years ago for a proper sequel. And since then, I've kind of come up with, I have an idea in mind for a prequel that I would like to do that could be done a lot more affordably. Whether or not I make those, I don't know. I mean, I'm surprised that people kind of stopped asking me after so many times of being told, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. So we'll see, the possibility is there, but.
Never say never, right?
Never say never. The one that we dusted off before Side Effects is actually a straight out comedy. It's kind of the closest thing I could compare it to would be After Hours, the Martin Scorsese movie with Griffin Dunn. Where all of his madcap adventures in the course of a single evening. It's kind of in that vein, but not literally like that. But Old Wives' Tales is the name of that one, and that's something I would like to probably do. I think actually after making Side Effects, which I said has got a lot of intentional humor in it, and seeing that when the audience responding and laughing in the right places and all the jokes are really landing the way I would have hoped they would, I'm a little more confident now to maybe go out and make something that's not a straight horror movie or not, So that's pretty much the majority of what I've made is horror, science fiction, which I love and will continue to do. But I would like to try my hand. I think my first real love, I always thought it was science fiction and then horror, but I think honestly now I think I love to laugh. I love to watch comedies, and I would like to try my hand at a flat out comedy at some point, whether it's that one or something else.
Oh, you could do it. There's so much. When there's comedy in your films, it hits. It's good. So.
I'll think. Yeah, I always like to say that whether it was intentional or unintentional, they're already laughing. So I might as well just make the kind of movie that I want to make right out of the gate.
I dig it. Well, since we're on the subject, usually on the show, I'll ask wrestlers crazy road stories because they're living all these crazy, can you give me a crazy story about making a film on set? Just something wild happen.
Well, I mean, the classic one, of course, I hate to go back to the Dead Next Door well, but that's probably the most insane thing I've ever done was we, from the beginning while we were prepping the movie and while I was writing it, I had the intention of showing zombies in Washington, D.C. That was part of the whole thing, is like to broaden the scope of it. So the question became how we were going to pull that off. And early on, we had called the Washington, D.C. film office, and I talked to a very nice lady there and told her, what we wanted to do, and that we wanted zombies here and here and here, and that we wanted zombies in front of the White House and all that stuff, and was basically told, well, this is going to cost this much, this is going to cost this much, and under no circumstances can you have zombies on the White House fence. So that was, I viewed that as sort of the starting offer, and I said, well, we'll table this for now, but we're, with the plan was always, we're just going to go down there and shoot it and not because we can't afford, the permits, the closing the streets, all that insanity that was just not going to happen on that budget.
Right.
So we drove down there. We took this zombie squad wagon, which we had turned this Ford station wagon into a zombie squad wagon, and drove that down, and we had a van, I think, that we had rented or borrowed from somebody, and with a very small elite crew of people that were involved in it who could both play zombies and help us, pull this off. I think there was probably 7 or 8 of us total. And I even had I had a cat at the time named Howard, and we took the cat with us on this trip. And literally, like, the makeup effects guy is sitting in the very back of the station wagon, like sitting in the back seat next to the cat's litter box.
Oh, wow.
He was not very happy about it, but anyway, so we went down there. It took us like 6 or 7 hours to drive down there. We got there. We had a problem, some miscommunication. We were supposed to stay at a hotel. There was a miscommunication with the hotel wouldn't take our business check, and I didn't have access to any other funds at the time. So we wound up just saying, well, let's just go shoot what we came to do, and then we'll just go back and, forget about this whole expense, which of course nobody was that excited about, but we did it. And so we got a few shots off, and then we went to the White House, because I figured, well, let's start there because that's going to be the trickiest one to do. I found the spot where we wanted to shoot it, where you see the White House in the background. And anybody that's seen the movie, you know where this is going. Obviously, you've seen the shots, and those were not opticals or anything like that. We were actually there. So we put the zombies on the fence, position them. I grabbed the little Super 8 camera. I'm shooting this stuff, and out of the corner of my eye, both ways, because the 2 cars are driving around the ellipse around the White House.
Mm-hmm.
I see security coming towards us, like in the distance. They're running, and they're starting to move a little bit faster. So I got the last shot that I wanted, and I said, "Okay, everybody, let's go." And right at that moment, the van pulled up, and we all piled in the van, closed the door, and drove around. Well, by the time we got halfway around the ellipse, they had closed the whole road off.
Oh, wow.
Like, they had the FBI, the CIA, the White House police, the Secret Service. I mean, everybody had come out, because apparently what happened is when we were climbing the White House fence, we set off every alarm in the White House.
Oh, wow.
And probably if we had stayed there another 30 to 45 seconds, they probably would have started shooting, because they weren't sure because we had zombies made up. They thought we were terrorists. I mean, that was, this was before 9/11 and all that. You could never, ever in a million years even attempt something like, you can't even get that close to the White House anymore.
Right.
Now, but back then you still could. So we were fortunately, one of my producers, Scott Plummer, had gone to the University of Akron, so he had a student ID. So we kind of passed the whole thing off like it was just a student film. They saw that I was just shooting on this little Super 8 camera. Once they realized what was going on, because they had like the drug sniffing dogs, and I mean, it was just I wish I had a picture of it. Nobody thought, we didn't have smartphones then. Nobody thought to even take a picture of what was going on.
Right.
So they let us go, and they said, look, you got to go to the DC film office if you're going to before you're going to do any more shooting, and you got to get a permit. And I'm like, well, crap, that's probably the end of that. So we went to the film office, and I wound up talking to the very same lady that I had talked to, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years earlier, whatever it was.
Uh-huh.
And she took pity on me and said, that was a very ambitious thing to do, so I'm going to let you go get the shots that you need to do. I think she realized that it was just a little tiny movie, and she said, don't bother anybody, don't get in anybody's way, but I'll give you this piece of paper that allows you to go and do the she asked me what shots we needed to do, and I told her, and it was nothing that, we went to the Lincoln Memorial, I think, and a few other spots, the reflecting pond, all the shots are in the movie. Mm-hmm. And so she let us go, and we shot the stuff, and we got something to eat and headed back home. And literally from the time we left in the evening to the time we got back was almost exactly 24 hours later. So that whole misadventure took exactly 24 hours, including travel and shooting.
Wow.
So that would be my craziest. I'm not sure that I've done other crazy stuff. I know there was a movie called Zombie Cop that we did in the early 90s. We were running around this cop dressed up like a zombie with his face all wrapped up, and he's got a shotgun full of blanks, and he's running around chasing James Black, who is a black man. The actor is a black guy, and chasing him through the streets of Mogador, Ohio, which is this little village, which is not, let's just say, terribly racially sensitive. You know,
Okay.
they're a little bit behind the times.
Right
And
on.
so this guy's running around shooting blanks, you know, which are loud. It sounds like we're actually firing guns. Well, we're firing guns at this guy running away from him. So I can't even imagine what the people who were looking out their windows thought. I mean, my father was a police officer in this small town. I should preface by saying that. So they kind of just said, "Oh, well, it's that Bookwalter kid again out there, you know, messing things up." So, but yeah. So those would be my two creed. You got two. You got a bonus story there.
I appreciate you. Thank you much. That's good stuff too. I bet you did have a reputation in your town. There's no doubt in my mind.
Well, definitely in my neighborhood. Yeah, there was because we were always up to something. When I was a young man shooting stuff on Super 8, we would just run around putting like the neighbor cats and squirting them with ketchup and all that. You know, just whatever you could, or the neighbor kids or whatever. We were eviscerating people in the middle of the street. So everybody knew who I was.
Living the dream. I love it.
Yeah.
I read an interview last night, and it was interesting to me. You'd mentioned you was coming back because you was watching a lot of the new filmmakers. You weren't liking, the way I took it, you didn't like some of what you were seeing. And that brings me to the internet. I even put out a crappy short horror film that shouldn't be on the internet. It gives everybody the opportunity, but is the market getting flooded with all this crap because of the internet and YouTube, Vimeo, Tubi, etc.? Where do you stand on this?
Well, I mean, I saw this coming before I gave up 23 years ago. There was already, I mean, it was the minute you had camcorders where anybody could just buy a camcorder and make a movie. I mean, it's, of course, now it's even more ridiculously easy because people can just take out their phones, and those cameras on those phones are far better than what we had even back in the early video days, or even the later video days. And it's not that I started very much the same way. I did a lot of short films. You were kind of learn your craft by doing it, making mistakes, trying to fix those mistakes and make new mistakes. So I don't want to send the message that I don't think anybody should try, because that's not it at all. I just see a lot of what I would probably consider lazy filmmaking. People that, and it's not that they don't know any. I see a lot of filmmakers making movies over and over and over again that make the same mistakes over and over again. They don't ever seem to learn how to properly do it. And I guess that's why I get frustrated. It's not so much, I don't like picking on people who are just starting to do it, because they're learning, and of course there's exceptions to be made there. But when you see guys who have done it for so long, and the movies don't look any better, then you have to start wondering, okay, are they doing this? Is this on purpose, or is this, because they just don't know what the hell they're doing? But that said too, a lot of the horror stuff that I watch these days, it just doesn't, I don't know. I guess I was spoiled by growing up in an era where we had, throughout the late 70s and throughout the 80s, we had such a treasure trove of horror movies. Yep. It was hard not to be spoiled. And on top of that, you had all the stuff that was made in the 40s, 50s, and 60s that you could watch on television endlessly, the Universal classics and just so many other movies, Roger Corman movies, all that stuff. Now we just have a glut of product, and I mean, it's just so much stuff that it's impossible for anybody to consume it all. And,
right.
and it's just sort of created a situation where nobody thrives because there's just too much stuff. And I don't know why I would want to throw my hat back into that ring, because this is a terrible time to come out of retirement and make something again. But again, I think it's good that we have these avenues. There's very little money in streaming. Very few people are successful enough at the business to make any real money off of it. So I'm constantly surprised that so many people are still making movies like this, little movies, because there's just not, financially, good luck. There's not a lot of money in it. You got to be doing it for some other reason. You got to do it because you really love to do it, or you really have a story you want to tell, or that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, I just felt like, I was sitting on the sidelines, not doing anybody any good. So I thought, well, let's see if I'm right or wrong. And I figure if nothing else, I practice my chops again. I went into it since I was shooting it and lighting it, I wanted it to look better than a lot of the stuff that I was seeing at the time. So many of the horror movies now are very like darkly lit, very flat, very like almost borderline ugly. They just a lot of them just they put these filters or these looks on it that so it looks distressed or whatever, and it just everything looks the same a lot
Yep.
in cases, and it just felt like, gosh, I want something that's the complete opposite of that. I want something that's sort of like almost obnoxiously bright and bold and colorful, like the stuff that I grew up with. That was really, it's really a throwback to another era of movie making that you just don't see a lot of people doing anymore.
And you can see it in the trailer. I'm so excited to see it.
Yeah,
What?
I mean, and that's just a fraction, but I mean, it was just trying to treat every single shot like I won't say a work of art because that sounds very pretentious, and I'm not a pretentious person, but it was I wanted every shot to look good. If it wasn't going to look good, we were going to work on it until it did, and so that when I cut the whole thing together, universally just across the board. Of course, there's always going to be clunky shots here and there or whatever, things that don't work as well as you want. That's just part of the you can go back and reshoot and do all these things, but it's just part of the process. But for the most part, I'm very happy with the look and the sound of the movie, and is another thing because I intentionally chose music that harkened back to a different era. It somebody had said, one of the early reviews we got said it. They even when they were watching it, that it looked and sounded like something that they would have seen at a drive-in years ago. Like it had that sort of feel and that kind of vibe for it, and that is exactly what I was trying to go for.
Yes, I can't wait to see it. I've kept you for an hour, J.R. Bookwalter. The movie sounds so crazy good. Where can the folks see it? Anything you want to plug before I let you go? If you want to let them know when the upcoming shows are, anything you want to put out there, have at it.
Sure. Yeah, we're in the midst of this road show. We did the first six venues last week. We're going to be in Akron. We're doing a hometown screening this Saturday, which is already sold out, and they actually just added a second screening on Sunday night, so people in Akron in Northeast Ohio have another chance to see it. We'll be in Englewood, Ohio on February 17th, which is kind of between Dayton and Columbus area. That's a little more south. And then we're going to New Jersey and Brooklyn, New York, and March and April. I'm going to be gone most of the time because I'm traveling to Minneapolis and Kansas City and Wichita, Albuquerque, Seattle, Denver. There's a whole bunch of screenings coming up. You can go to the MakeFlix website. There's a graphic right on the front page you can click on to see the full list of screenings. And we're constantly in the background trying to add new venues to see it, because I get a lot of people are like, what about Florida, what about my state, what about this one? So we're actively trying to get as many screenings. This will kind of culminate in June. I'm going over to Germany there's a film festival called Weekend of Fear, and that'll be the international premiere of the movie.
Yay.
So between now and then, we're just kind of filling whatever gaps we can with whatever, as we partner with new theaters that are willing to take a chance on something that's unproven movie, a new movie. So that's the best way to see it. If you go to one of those screenings and you're a fan of VHS, which is not a dead format, it's still around. We actually are selling a limited edition VHS, very cool collectible cover. It's we sign them and all that, and that's the only place you can buy it. So we've sold a lot of those so far from the first week. A lot of collectors want that memento because that's the only physical media you can get it on right now. It'll be a while before we do anything on Blu-ray or DVD. So
Okay, so I'm going to have to figure out how to get you to West Virginia if I want to see this movie.
Well, I'm trying to think where's the closest we're coming to. Well, we were just in, I don't know which part of West Virginia we're in. You're in, but we were in Harrisburg, which isn't too far, and Baltimore was probably the closest we came to you.
Okay, well,
We're working on one in Fairfax, Virginia. I don't know how far that is from you, but there's a bunch of theaters we're talking to, so at any moment that could change and we could add more venues. But we're trying to get to all 50 states.
well, let's say I'm a theater owner and I'm watching this. How can they get in contact if they'd like to show the film?
They can just go to the MakeFlix website or find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter or X or whatever it's called today.
Right.
And all those places, very easy to find. Yeah, just reach out to us and say, hey, I want to screen this. We actually, that's how we kind of got started. We put out social media posts, and on MakeFlix, we asked people, you know, we're going to take this around. Where do you want to see it? And people were sort of generously said, oh, what about this theater? What about that theater? And that's kind of how we started this whole freight train in the first place, was just kind of booking those venues that people, so we knew that there were people that were going to go. It was a lot easier to go to the theaters and say, hey, look, there's people who want to see this. Let's put it in your theater.
I dig it. Okay.
And the timing is good because, you know, the Hollywood strike had, you know, the writers and the actors were on strike last year, so there is not a ton of new movies in the pipeline. I've heard that there's like 19 weeks out of this year, 2024, where there will actually not be any new releases from studios.
Oh wow.
So it's kind of an interesting time to be doing this, because I think a lot of theaters are like, well, we got to book something, so let's you know, let's take a chance on something new.
Good. I dig it. I'm rooting for you.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Yeah, of course. Bring side effects may vary to your town. J.R. Bookwalter, I can't thank you enough. This is
my pleasure.
A dream come true. If you don't mind, I'll ask you to hang on the line for me. But to the listeners, this man's an example. He's busted his ass. He's lived his dream. I'd like to think so. You spoke pretty fondly of it. Are you happy at the end of the day?
Yeah, I mean, hey, you know, there's a lot. My partner James Edwards, you know, who produced and wrote and stars in Side Effects, has gone on record saying, you know, the worst day on a movie set is still better than the best day in real life. I don't know that I would go quite that far, because I have a wife and kids and other things that I would cherish, you know, as much as making movies. But, you know, certainly to be able to still do this after all this time is very, very rewarding.
Awesome. Couldn't be happier for you. I thank you for the memories, for the awesome movies. Keep making them. To the listeners, this is what it's all about, man. Go out there, live your dreams, treat each other with kindness and respect. Stay tuned. We're just getting started. We got more craziness this week. Spooky loves you. I thank you for allowing this to happen. You, the listener. You enjoy your evening. We'll see you on the next one.